Saint Catherine of Bologna of the Second Order, from the Franciscan Herald. Saint Catherine, who is called, in the office of her feast, a mirror of poverty, innocence, and purity, was born of a noble family in Bologna, Italy, in 1413. Her pious parents in every way fostered the sentiments of piety which she manifested from her earliest childhood, especially her love of solitude and prayer and her tender compassion for the poor. When Catherine was about 10 years of age, she was brought to the court of Nicholas d'Este, Marquis of Ferrara, a relative of hers, to be educated with the young Princess Margaret. Here she charmed all by her singular modesty, prudence, and innocence. In the midst of the splendor and comforts of the court, the saintly child did not allow her heart to become attached to the things of the world, but constantly kept before her mind the thought of God and of heavenly things, and thus made rapid progress in virtue and holiness. At the same time, she applied herself with great diligence to the acquisition of the knowledge and the accomplishments demanded of a person of her rank. She soon became proficient in the Latin language, as her writings show, while several paintings from her brush, which are still preserved, show that she devoted herself with success to the fine arts. After spending 3 years at the court of Ferrara, Catherine was at length able to carry out her long-cherished desire to forsake the world and to consecrate herself entirely to the service of God. Princess Margaret was married to the Prince of Rimini, and Catherine, in spite of the urgent request of her former companion and friend to accompany her to her new home, left the court to return to her pious mother. Endowed with solid as well as brilliant qualities of mind and heart, and heiress to a large fortune, Catherine was sought in marriage by several noble gentlemen. But her heart was held captive by the love of her heavenly spouse, and she refused all these honorable proposals, though they offered her grand prospects for the future. She soon joined a number of young women who were leading a community life according to the rule of the Third Order of St. Augustine, and who, by their piety and modest bearing, were objects of admiration and edification to the whole city. In the company of these God-fearing souls, Catherine dedicated herself to God by a life of prayer, humility, and self-denial. Her great fervor in all religious exercises, and her complete abandonment of soul to the will of God, was rewarded with extraordinary graces and revelations. But these favors were only to prepare her for a series of trials which lasted 5 years and served to purify her heart. Her soul, filled with the delights of the love of God and consumed with zeal for His glory, was assailed by various temptations. The devil appeared to her as an angel of light and tried to induce her to give up her mode of life. Her mind was filled with blasphemous thoughts, and these thoughts were so importunate that nothing could distract her from them. They pursued her everywhere, even to the feet of her confessor, whose words of consolation did not procure her any comfort. Her willingness for good seemed to be deadened, and the service of God became to her distasteful and irksome. Catherine heroically resisted these terrible. If it ever happens that any one of you has to go through a similar trial, cling fast to prudence, and take care not to let yourself be crushed by sadness, as if it all came from yourself. No, all these bad thoughts come from the envy of the devil, who cannot bear that God should be worshipped, praised, and blessed by His creatures, as is His due. The saint was next attacked with temptations against faith, temptations so violent that, if she had not placed her entire confidence in the help of God, she would surely have succumbed. All these spiritual sufferings and trials could not shake her courage and her resolve to serve God with her whole heart. They only served to bring the saint into closer temptations, and the devil, finding that his artifices were in vain, left off molesting her. Wishing to make her experience useful to others, the saint related a long time afterwards to her sisters what took place in these temptations. "Oh, my dearly beloved sisters," she said. "Union with God by increasing in her the virtues of humility, love, and confidence, as they were invariably followed by the most abundant spiritual consolations, and the enjoyment of the delights of contemplation." She also derived great lights from these conflicts, which enabled her to detect the snares of the devil and to counsel others in the difficult ways of spiritual life. These her counsels and instructions are contained in her treatise on the 7 spiritual weapons, which she composed with the aid of her confessor, shortly before her death. When Catherine had thus served God during a period of 5 years, she and her companions, who had until then observed the rule of the Third Order of St. Augustine, were invited to embrace the rule of St. Clare in a convent that had been built at Ferrara by the Princess Verde. Urged by Catherine, the members of the little community accepted the invitation, and they were clothed with the habit of St. Clare, in 1432. Under the guidance of a few fervent daughters of the great Saint of Assisi, from the convent at Mantua, the new community with great zeal observed the austere rule of the Holy Foundress. Catherine, above all, strove to follow in the footsteps of Saint Francis and Saint Clare, and gave to all an example of humility, obedience, and mortification. She was at first given charge of the bakery, and though this occupation affected her health, especially her eyesight, she fulfilled her duties with joy and resignation. Appointed mistress of novices, she was a sure guide and a finished pattern of perfection to the souls committed to her charge. She led them on the path of virtue by counsels full of the Spirit of God, but still more by her holy example. In 1456, Catherine was sent to Bologna to govern the convent newly established there. She began at once to strive by word and by example to establish in her community all the observances of the rule. The fame of the heroic virtues of the saintly abbess spread far and wide, and led many pious souls to abandon the world and to place themselves under her enlightened guidance. The saint was at length to enter into her eternal reward. She had spent 36 years in the service of her heavenly spouse, and had not only sanctified herself, but had guided and assisted others on the way of perfection, and she now longed to be united forever with the object of all her thoughts and aspirations. Her longing was fulfilled on March 9, 1463. Her body was at first buried in the cemetery of the community, but later it was transferred to the choir of the convent. Still incorrupt, it is exposed to the veneration of the people, sitting on a throne and clothed in costly garments. Many miracles were wrought at her tomb. The solemnity of her canonization was performed by Pope Clement XI, though the bull of canonization was published by Pope Benedict XIII in 1724. Taken from the March 1916 issue of the magazine Franciscan Herald. The author is not listed, but was probably Father Silas Barth.